Good afternoon. The session is being recorded. Good morning and good afternoon, everyone. Thanks so much for joining us today. My name is Raquel Vázquez Llorente, and I'm the permanent representative to the ICC for FIDH, the International Federation for Human Rights. I will be facilitating our conversation today about the legacy of Prosecutor Bensouda. We have a great lineup for today's discussion. Before we dive in, I'm going to make a couple of quick housekeeping notes. There is live interpretation from and into English, French, and Spanish, so please choose your channel. If you have any issues with the translation, please let us know in the chat and our support team will try to help you. And it's going to be a dynamic conversation, so please use the chat to comment and ask your questions in either of those three languages, English, French, or Spanish. I will try to squeeze in as many comments and questions as I can possibly am able to during the conversation. So let's get on with it. I want to extend a warm welcome today to James Stewart, ICC Deputy Prosecutor, to Diane Brown, who is a legal expert on sexual and gender-based violence and is speaking on behalf of Women's Initiative for Gender Justice. Calixto Avila Rincon, who is from Provea, Venezuela. Maria Mantatze from the Georgian Center for Psychosocial and Medical Rehabilitation of Torture Victims. And Alison Smith, the Director of International Criminal Justice Program at No Peace Without Justice. Thank you all for being here today. FIDH has just released this morning a report analyzing the legacy of Prosecutor Bensouda. As we all know, on 15th of June of this year, Fatou Bensouda stepped down after a 9-year mandate as a prosecutor of the ICC. And FIDH took this occasion to reflect on the progress and setbacks of the Office of the Prosecutor in 3 key areas that are very relevant to the mandate of our organization. So these areas are accountability of sexual and gender-based crimes. We work on this research in collaboration with Women's Initiative for Gender Justice. The second key area for us is preliminary examinations. And the third area was outreach to victims, affected communities, and civil society organizations. And we work on this research in collaboration with No Peace Without Justice. The report that we have launched today is a compilation of these 3 papers that we published throughout 2021. I invite you all to check it out, in particular, the recommendations that we put forward for Prosecutor Karim Khan in each of these areas. And the link to the report is already on the chat, so you have it there to consult. I would like to remark that especially the preliminary examinations and the outreach sections are approached from the perspective of civil society, and in particular from those organizations that have been involved in gathering information for the purposes of contributing to preliminary examinations and proceedings at the court, and also the perspectives of other legal practitioners who have been somehow involved in the situation countries in activities that touch on the work of the prosecution. The team at No Peace Without Justice, Amanda Harmani, and FIDH held extensive consultations with nearly 70 organizations that are working in and on virtually all countries where the ICC has an ongoing preliminary examination or where proceedings have already started. So this has been a very brief overview. And from my side, I want to leave it here because I think it's more interesting to hear it from the horse's mouth. And since we have such a great lineup today, I would like to get started by inviting Deputy Prosecutor James Stewart to tell us a bit more about what you believe is Prosecutor Bensouda's legacy, but also your legacy as the Deputy Prosecutor and someone who's been in the role since 2012. So over to you, Mr. Deputy Prosecutor.
Thank you very much, Raquel. I'll begin by thanking FIDH and those who organized this event for their invitation. And as you've just said, I've been invited to speak about the legacy of Prosecutor Fatou Bensouda. I'm very pleased to do so because you're right, I served as Fatou's deputy for 8 years. And to a degree, I do share her legacy. At least my experience with her allows me to form a very personal view of that legacy. And I'm certainly not going to attempt to comment on a report that I've not yet read, which came out today, but give you what may sound like a somewhat impressionistic sense of Fatou's legacy, but I hope it's one that's going to resonate with you. I am, as the current deputy prosecutor, strongly supportive of the new prosecutor, Karim Khan QC, as he has begun to reshape the office he inherited from Fatou. But it may be useful as we look forward to new beginnings for the OTP with Karim's arrival in office, to look back for a moment and to consider what Fatou's legacy might be. So as I said, I'm going to offer a very personal view, but as I say, one I hope that will resonate with you, that you'll recognize. And obviously there are many, many features of Fatou's time in office that one could identify as contributing to her legacy. But I'm going to suggest 7. And I'm going to use a keyword to introduce each one of these features, and then I'll explain the significance of that keyword. So let me begin this way with the word integrity. Recognizing that the OTP walks a sharp line between justice and politics, Fatou's mantra was always that we must adhere to the Rome Statute, acting purely on the basis of the evidence and information that we had and the laws that applied to that evidence and information, without political calculation. For her, this was a genuine and deep commitment. Of course, she was perfectly conscious of the political context within which we operated, in which we operate, but she believed in delivering impartial, independent, and objective justice. And this, I believe, forms a very significant part of her legacy, and one that continues to influence the OTP deeply today. It fits, I say, with the vision of the new prosecutor. Courage. Fatou insisted upon the independence of the office she led. This was fundamental. She was undeterred when certain powerful and influential actors attempted to intimidate her. They underestimated her, but her bravery came at a very personal cost. In some ways, her actions and words in the face of the Trump executive order and sanctions revealed Fatou at her best, unbowed in the face of threats, rallying states parties and civil society to the defense of the court and its independence, and working closely with the other court principals to maintain business continuity in a very trying time. And here I have to mention the magnificent work of the Registrar Peter Lewis, with whom Fatou worked very closely, but who was very supportive of Fatou during what was a very difficult time. Intelligence. Fatou possessed sensitive antennae. She could read people and situations and knew when to intervene at key moments, and often at the top level. These interventions were sometimes done quietly, always with a view to opening the way to our investigations. She's possessed of a very fine mind, but also a deep emotional intelligence. There was always, in fact, there is always a great warmth about Fatou, and this drew people to her, including her staff. Fatou has a wicked sense of humor as well. And this is a quality I have always associated with an intelligent outlook upon the world and its foibles. Even in the darkest moments, she never lost that quality. Consensus. Fatou was a listener with great patience. She was happiest, I think, when consensus on issues built up around her. This appears to have led to a surprising misunderstanding in certain quarters. Fatou was always, as prosecutor, the decision maker, as she had to be under the Rome Statute, but she liked to form consensus if she could. She never abdicated her role, however, and was prepared to follow her own view on an issue. The importance of her team, nevertheless, was fundamental. How do you do it? My wife once asked her. My team, Fatou responded in a heartbeat. Policies. Fatou recognized that the OTP and the court itself could shape thinking on many issues of vital importance to the development of international criminal law. She took an especial interest in the most vulnerable victims and communities affected by the crimes she was investigating and prosecuting. Thus, she initiated the development of key OTP policies and promulgated them as guiding lights for the operations of her office. Policies such as the policy on sexual and gender-based crimes, the policy on children, and the policy on the protection of cultural heritage. These have molded the thinking in the OTP, but have also helped shape attitudes, not just on the international level, but domestically too. And these policies form an integral and lasting part of Fatou's legacy. Successes. Fatou achieved a number of notable successes. I mean successes in court. What happens in court being, as Karim puts it in a homely yet vivid way, our shop window. There were disappointments, of that there's no doubt. I need not list them here. But where we were able to achieve the optimal performance we aimed for, the OTP was very successful. Think of Al-Mahdi and cultural heritage. Think of Ntiganda and the protection extended to child soldiers, the victims of sexual violence in the ranks of his own armed group. Think of the outcome in the Ongwen case, with conviction and sentence now under appeal, but which also broke new ground respecting sexual and gender-based crimes. And the court today is busier than it has ever been in its history, with 5 trials ongoing or getting underway next year. This didn't just happen. It's the product of hard and intelligent work during Fatou's term as prosecutor. Finally, foundation. Fatou left a solid foundation upon which the new prosecutor is building. While Karim is restructuring the office and re-examining its policies and processes, he is doing so on the basis of a foundation that was laid during Fatou's time in office. This may be less obvious to the outside world, but so much of what the independent experts recommended we do in the OTP was a reflection of what we were doing or planning to do in an office that was continually striving to do better. Information and ideas we shared with the experts that are reflected in the IER report. There's always more to do. The OTP can never stand still. The review process we're undergoing now is one we have embraced, and we're making progress. The foundation created during Fatou's time is part of her legacy, and it's a legacy upon which Karim is building to enable new evolutionary developments in the OTP and the way it works under his fresh direction. Now, how do these 7 features I've suggested together form Fatou's legacy? Well, they help shape the history of the OTP and the court itself. They contribute to the present that the new prosecutor is building upon. They will, I think, inspire the future, since the qualities of integrity, courage, and independence that Fatou exhibited stand as the epitome of what the ICC prosecutor should be. And her concrete achievements provide the springboard for greater achievements to come. Those that come now stand on the shoulders of those who went before. I'll leave it there. Summing up, Fatou, I believe, acquitted herself in an impossible job with integrity, courage, conviction, compassion, and dedication to the cause of accountability and deterrence. And above all, with a deep concern for those who are the victims of terrible crimes. The fight to unseat impunity continues. The torch has only been passed to fresh hands. Thanks for listening.
Thank you, Mr. Deputy Prosecutor, for giving us the insider's perspective on the legacy of Fatou Bensouda. I would like to bring in Diane to talk about what are your views in regards to sexual and gender-based crimes. You work on that part of the report with Women's Initiative for Gender Justice. So is it in your view, do you agree with Deputy Prosecutor on what he's been saying, or do you think it's mostly a positive or negative legacy in what it comes to sexual and gender-based crimes?
Thank you, Raquel. First, I'm very grateful to the International Federation for Human Rights and Women's Initiatives for Gender Justice for giving me this opportunity to present the findings of the report relating to sexual and gender-based crimes. And I'm humbled to be here with such distinguished colleagues. Historically, victims of sexual and gender-based crimes in conflict have largely been denied justice. And this is despite the prevalence of these crimes committed against not only women and men, girls and boys, but against persons spanning the spectrum of gender identity. Due in significant part to the lobbying by women's rights advocates, the Rome Statute sought to address this accountability gap, codifying the widest range of sexual and gender-based crimes in any international legal instrument. The Rome Statute thus ushered in a promise of justice. And in this paper, we set out Prosecutor Bensouda's main achievements in delivering on this promise during her 9-year mandate. We also identify key challenges faced, as well as existing opportunities to expand the reach of accountability. Based on this assessment, I would agree with the Deputy Prosecutor. It can be concluded that overall, Prosecutor Bensouda leaves behind a strong legacy of accomplishment in addressing these crimes, providing a solid foundation upon which the OTP under Prosecutor Khan's leadership can build. And I'll provide you with a snapshot of our main findings in this regard. In terms of achievements, immediately upon assuming office, Prosecutor Bensouda prioritized the drafting of the policy paper on sexual and gender-based crimes, and she promulgated it soon thereafter. Through application of this policy during her tenure, the OTP initiated 13 new preliminary examinations, and 9 of these featured sexual and gender-based crimes. The OTP also concluded 2 preliminary examinations in Nigeria and the Ukraine, finding in each instance that the criteria to proceed with investigations, including into sexual and gender-based crimes, had been met. Under her leadership, the OTP opened 7 new investigations, and all but 1 included allegations of sexual and gender-based crimes. And the OTP brought sexual and gender-based crime charges in 3 out of 6 new cases against 3 out of 7 suspects and accused. The OTP also brought important new charges for sexual and gender-based crimes in 2 ongoing cases that the prosecutor inherited. The cases against Bosco Ntaganda and Dominic Ongwen, and this resulted in groundbreaking convictions. During her tenure, the OTP secured, as the Deputy Prosecutor indicated, its first final conviction for sexual and gender-based crimes in the Ntaganda case, including for rape and sexual slavery committed against child soldiers, as well as both female and male civilians. And this case set an important international precedent when the appeals chamber accepted the OTP's position that rape and sexual slavery by members of an armed group against members of that same group could constitute war crimes. In the Ongwen case, the prosecutor secured a first instance conviction for 19 counts of sexual and gender-based crimes, including for forced marriage and forced pregnancy. This is the first time that forced pregnancy has been prosecuted by an international court, and this case is currently under appeal. Another trailblazing OTP achievement under Prosecutor Bensouda's leadership is the confirmation of the charge of gender-based persecution in the Al-Hassan case. And Mr. Al-Hassan is the first individual to be prosecuted for the crime of gender-based persecution in international law. In terms of setbacks, we highlighted the challenge of establishing a sufficient link between the accused and the sexual and gender-based crimes for which they were charged. A case in point is that against Germain Katanga and Mathieu Ngajolo. While the trial chamber convicted Mr. Katanga for certain crimes, Mr. Katanga was acquitted for all sexual and gender-based crimes. And although the trial chamber found that these crimes had been committed, it concluded there was insufficient evidence to establish Mr. Katanga's liability. Similarly, in the case against Jean-Pierre Bemba, the appeals chamber overturned the OTP's first conviction for charges of sexual and gender-based crimes, holding that the trial chamber erred in finding that Mr. Bemba's liability for the crimes had been established under the doctrine of command responsibility. Further details on our findings can be found in the report. Thank you.
Thanks, Diane, for that great and succinct overview of the past 9 years at the Office of the Prosecutor in regards to sexual and gender-based crimes. Me gustaría invitar ahora a Calixto Ávila para que nos pudieras dar tu opinión sobre cuál es, desde la perspectiva de organizaciones que están trabajando en los países que la Corte Penal Internacional tiene bajo examen preliminar o investigación, como es el caso de Venezuela. Ahora, me gustaría saber tu opinión sobre cuál es el legado de la Fiscalía y cuál es la perspectiva de organizaciones como Provea. Listo, un segundo. Creo que no te podemos oír. Dame un segundo. ¿Puedes darle al botón para... porque estás ahora, intenta de nuevo. No te podemos oír. No sé cuál es el problema. Si no, vamos a intentar ver si lo podemos resolver. In the meantime, while we fix this, I think I would like to invite Mariam to give us her views. Calixto, volvemos enseguida en cuanto consigamos arreglarlo, ¿vale? Mariam, over to you.
Thank you, Raquel. I will talk about outreach that was conducted during Fatou Bensouda's time in Georgia. So effective investigation of the crimes and bringing perpetrators to justice is vital for restoring rights of the victims, as well as ensuring accountability of the states and eradicating syndrome of impunity. Conducting timely, efficient in-country presence, public information and outreach is fundament for an efficient investigation. There have been a number of shortcomings that Georgia investigation faced in terms of outreach, some of which I believe could have been avoided, possibly ensuring different outcome by now. Currently, in addition to protracted investigation, we CSOs and affected communities are in complete informational vacuum about the progress of the investigation for a very long time. And uncertainty related to investigation further leaves victims in a very vulnerable position, causing distrust in ICC and justice mechanisms overall, risking the failure of the investigation. Ms. Bensouda's approach to outreach and engagement with affected communities is a very positive step. However, there still is a need for improvement, better and earlier engagement perhaps, and more in-country presence. In 2018, we NGOs uniting Georgian Coalition for the ICC conducted a survey which revealed that 51% of the victims we interacted with have not heard about ICC and or the investigation. And among the 49% who have heard about ICC, 2% and only 2% received the information through meetings with ICC representatives. And this is largely and solely because of court's failure to provide effective outreach activities throughout the period and including preliminary examination stage. In Georgia, the extended investigation gives the impression that ICC met Georgian situation simply unprepared without having conducted proper background check and without having a clear strategy or vision on how to handle specific situation, specific challenges here. And despite the confidential nature of the investigation, some information should be shared with CSOs and affected communities in order to fill out existing informational vacuum and to avoid misinformation that can greatly damage the effectiveness of the ongoing process. And therefore, implementing a fully fledged outreach strategy coordinated by multiple sectors of ICC and establishing a stable communication line with affected communities and using contribution provided by CSOs using this opportunity are the key elements for success. Thank you.
Thanks, Mariam. So in your view, what will be the first step for the new prosecutor, relatively new prosecutor Karim Khan, to take to improve outreach? If you can give us, for instance, 3 points, that would be great.
In regards to Georgia, there's desperate need for detailed and balanced information amongst victims and affected communities, as well as media and general public. So addressing this issue would be a priority. Secondly, developing a court-wide strategy on its engagement in situation country to ensure that all organs have similar vision and have how to overcome challenges and ensure effective implementation of court's mandate. And lastly, conducting in-depth background assessment during preliminary examination is a key, I believe, and obtaining a cultural, social understanding of the situation country before opening the investigation. And then based on the obtained information, drafting a strategy on how to handle this situation. I think this would be the 3 points I would suggest to the new prosecutor. Thank you, Raquel.
Thanks, they're great. And they are actually very in line with what we included in our report in terms of like the more general points. Calisto, vamos a intentarlo de nuevo, a ver si podemos escucharte ahora.
Bueno, muchas gracias. ¿Me escuchan ahora sí bien?
Sí, ahora perfecto. Adelante.
Muchas gracias por la invitación y también por el excelente informe que me han dado la oportunidad de comentar en este momento. Yo hago mi intervención en español un poco en solidaridad también con mis colegas francófonos que solicitan que muchos de estos debates sean hechos en una lengua también como el francés o el español, en orden con ánimo de construir mucha más capacidad desde ese mundo francófono hispanohablante para hacer frente a los dossiers en la Corte Penal Internacional. Yo creo que este informe es muy valioso. Efectivamente hay algunos aspectos negativos y voy a empezar por los aspectos negativos porque creo que son los menos importantes y porque hay unos aspectos positivos muy bien destacados en el informe. y que se refieren a la gestión y al legado de la señora Fatou Bensouda y de su equipo, que creo que es importante destacar que tras la señora Fatou Bensouda ha habido un equipo que ha trabajado muy duro durante estos 9 años. Los aspectos negativos destacados en el informe hacen referencia a la necesidad de mayores avances en la participación de las víctimas dentro del examen preliminar.
Advances made by the victims.
Muchas veces son enviados a la sociedad civil desde los diferentes órganos de la Corte Penal Internacional y que crean confusión y un poco de falta de comprensión del sistema de la Corte Penal Internacional. La falta hasta ahora de un documento sobre una política de confidencialidad de la información transmitida a la CPI, que redundaría en una mayor interacción por parte de la sociedad civil con la oficina de la Fiscalía, y en la desconfianza constatada en la investigación, en el uso de las comunicaciones electrónicas y de la seguridad de la información transmitida de manera electrónica a la oficina del fiscal. En cuanto a los aspectos positivos, me quiero referir a dos. El primero es el establecimiento de un documento de política general sobre exámenes preliminares, a Policy Paper on Preliminary Examination. Este documento, que fue creado por la oficina y a propuesta inicial del fiscal anterior, el señor Moreno Ocampo, en 2010, que presentó un borrador y que fue finalmente consolidado bajo la administración de la señora Fatou Bensouda, fue consolidada en el 2013 y le permitió durante todos estos años tener un trabajo de un documento básico para desarrollar sus actividades. Es un documento que se basa en los principios de independencia, imparcialidad y objetividad, que define unos procedimientos para lograr unos objetivos específicos, en especial en temas de transparencia, de poner fin a la impunidad y en materia de prevención de crímenes de competencia de la Corte. Entonces, este documento es sin lugar a dudas el primer aspecto positivo a destacar como el legado de la señora Fatou Bensouda y de su equipo en estos 9 años. El segundo aspecto se refiere a aspectos prácticos. En primer lugar, se caracterizó la administración de la señora Fatou Bensouda por pasar de una actividad que venía siendo más ad hoc, una actividad más basada en hechos en desarrollo, para crear un marco más claro de procedimientos para concluir análisis. La señora Fatou Bensouda logra estandarizar métodos y prácticas, introduce políticas internas y crea líneas guías y formatos de actuación. También durante esta administración se han desarrollado 3 planes estratégicos, el último vigente hasta este año, que permitieron en particular brindar mayor rapidez, mayor efectividad y mayor eficacia a la gestión de la oficina del fiscal. También introdujo aspectos como indicadores, en particular, por ejemplo, respecto al procedimiento en el artículo 15 del estatuto, que le permite iniciar una investigación a la oficina del fiscal para que luego se constituya en un examen preliminar. En cuanto a la región latinoamericana, yo creo que el balance tiene algunos aspectos positivos y otros aspectos negativos. Empiezo por el negativo. Creo que uno de los aspectos es que México, a pesar de la situación crítica que vive, no ha sido hasta el momento mencionado en ninguno de los informes de la oficina del fiscal, y creo que eso es una deuda hacia futuro en la nueva administración de asumir con mayor cuidado la situación mexicana, que continúa siendo crítica. En la situación de Colombia, obviamente un examen preliminar concluido después de 17 años, en donde la señora Fatou Bensouda y su equipo escucharon a las organizaciones de la sociedad civil, en donde mantuvieron el examen abierto durante momentos críticos de la vida nacional en Colombia, y que desafortunadamente fue cerrado entrando en la administración del fiscal Karim Khan, y ahí hay una queja de mis colegas en Colombia en cuanto a la falta en cuanto a no haber escuchado a la sociedad civil antes de proceder a tomar esta decisión. Y la esperanza de que el convenio firmado con el Estado venezolano sea puesto de relieve en los años venideros. Y finalmente, sobre el tema de Venezuela, yo creo que hay que destacar la calidad de la investigación llevada adelante por la oficina de la señora Fatou Bensouda. La calidad de la investigación fue de tal nivel que permitió que 5 meses más tarde el fiscal entrante cerrara el examen preliminar y abriera la primera investigación de la Corte Penal Internacional en las Américas en la historia de este tribunal internacional. El fiscal Fatou Bensouda, el fiscal Karim Khan pudo de esta manera seguir la evidencia recaudada por su predecesora y de esta manera tomó una decisión de abrir una investigación básicamente sobre una decisión que fue tomada de manera, digamos, no esperada tanto por parte del Estado venezolano como tampoco de las organizaciones de la sociedad civil que esperábamos probablemente una continuación del examen preliminar y no la decisión de abrir la investigación como lo hizo. Así que es una buena noticia. De todas maneras, el procedimiento para abrir la investigación, por ejemplo, no estaba para nosotros claro si el fiscal abriría la investigación de manera directa sobre la base de la remisión de 6 estados partes que le permitía abrir de manera directa como finalmente sucedió, o si iba a pedir la autorización a la sala de cuestiones preliminares. En ese sentido, la administración de la señora Fatou Bensouda fue un poco ambigua en cuanto a saber cuál era la salida a ese problema, pero finalmente fue una decisión que para nosotros fue muy satisfactoria de abrir directamente con base en la remisión de los estados parte. En síntesis, creo que hay un trabajo muy importante, un gran reconocimiento a la fiscal Fatou Bensouda. Desde algunos sectores en Venezuela hubo críticas a su administración, en gran parte también por el desconocimiento de cómo funciona la fiscalía y la naturaleza de las investigaciones adelantadas. Hay que tener en cuenta que en Venezuela, como en muchos otros países, las organizaciones de la sociedad civil que actúan ante la Corte Penal Internacional están más vinculadas al tema de derechos humanos y de las instituciones de derechos humanos, y que el gran reto es comprender la Corte Penal Internacional, la Fiscalía, y también moverse en la frecuencia del derecho internacional penal, que es un tema diferente pero complementario. Hasta acá dejo. Muchísimas gracias, Raquel.
Gracias, Calixto. Me gustaría hacerte una pregunta mirando hacia adelante. Me gustaría saber mucho tu opinión sobre la situación que tenemos ahora mismo con el nuevo fiscal. Y, por ejemplo, ahora este año no se ha publicado el informe sobre exámenes preliminares que se ha estado publicando de forma anual. Venezuela ahora la investigación está abierta, pero como una situación que ha estado anteriormente en examen preliminar, me gustaría saber tu opinión de cómo de útil es este documento que se ha estado publicando durante los últimos años, y si crees que la Fiscalía debería reconsiderar esta decisión y volver a publicar de nuevo el informe anual sobre exámenes preliminares. ¿Lo encontraste útil? ¿Crees que las organizaciones en países bajo situación de la Corte encuentran este documento informativo?
Por supuesto, tiene un gran valor tanto informativo como de motivación hacia las organizaciones que están acudiendo a la Corte Penal, a la Fiscalía de la Corte Penal Internacional con la esperanza de que un examen preliminar sea abierto, o con la esperanza de que un examen preliminar termina en una investigación. Entonces, sí, lamentablemente durante el periodo de sesiones de la Asamblea de Estados Partes que ha concluido este sábado pasado, desafortunadamente no tuvimos una presentación del informe como había sido tradicional bajo la administración de la fiscal Fatou Bensouda, que estaba acompañado con un evento paralelo en donde las organizaciones de la sociedad civil de África, de Asia, de América, de Europa, de Oceanía, podían plantear preguntas a la fiscal o al fiscal sobre los procedimientos bajo examen preliminar, o sobre situaciones que, aunque no estuvieran bajo examen preliminar, sí que se encontraban por lo menos en la fase 1 y por lo tanto podían tener conocimiento de si se había o no tramitado la información enviada por parte de esas organizaciones. Yo creo que esperamos que el fiscal Karim Khan reconsidere su decisión. Suponemos que tal vez sea una situación coyuntural debido al hecho de que acaba de asumir, digamos, es un fiscal que acaba de asumir su cargo, y que se retome la práctica de la publicación de un informe sobre exámenes preliminares también para difundir y motivar mucho más a las organizaciones y a las víctimas en países en donde se cometen crímenes de competencia de la Corte Penal Internacional.
Gracias, creo que la respuesta ha sido bastante clara y veo que hay bastante gente en la reunión de la Fiscalía, de la oficina de la Fiscalía, así que bueno, ya esperaremos el año que viene a ver cuál es el resultado, pero muchas gracias, Calisto. Diane, I would like to get back to you and zoom out a bit and get a bit your opinion on a more legal aspect on the definition of gender in the Rome Statute, and what is your opinion whether it hinders, do you think it hinders accountability for sexual and gender-based crimes as it currently is defined in the Rome Statute gender?
Thank you, Raquel. This is a really important question. The Rome Statute defines gender as the two sexes, male and female, within the context of society. And while the definition does not reflect the full gender spectrum, it is our position that it does not impact the court's ability to prosecute or convict for gender-based crimes against persons who do not identify as male or female, that is, non-binary persons or gender non-conforming persons. First of all, the elements of crimes refer to persons. And with regard to crimes in which the invasion of the body of a person is an element, the elements of crimes makes clear that invasion should be interpreted in a gender neutral manner. And so the definitions of the crimes themselves are inclusive of all persons. Also, Article 21.3 of the Rome Statute requires the court to interpret the law in line with international human rights and without any distinction on grounds including gender. In the policy paper on sexual and gender-based crimes, the OTP clarified its interpretation of the Rome Statute definition of gender as a social construct. And it also committed to interpreting the definition in line with the evolution of human rights, which includes the right to be free from violence or discrimination based on gender identity. And for all of these reasons, we do not consider that the Rome Statute's definition of gender impedes accountability for sexual and gender-based crimes, regardless of against whom these crimes are committed.
And if I give you a couple of minutes, you hinted before that generally speaking, the legacy of Prosecutor Bensouda when it comes about sexual and gender-based crimes is largely positive, but I would like to hear what do you think is the most important aspect of this legacy, just in a couple of minutes.
Okay, so one of the most important aspects of Prosecutor Bensouda's legacy, and on this point I agree with the Deputy Prosecutor, is the manner in which she mainstreamed the prosecution and investigation of gender into the work of the OTP through the policy paper. And the fact that this is the first ever policy paper of its kind in any international court should not be underestimated. At this juncture, at the same time, it should be reviewed and updated to reflect changing norms and lessons learned. And this is in line with one of our recommendations in the report. It's encouraging that Prosecutor Khan has already indicated his intention to do this. He has stated that the policy paper should be a living document and that it will be continually reviewed and adapted. And he's taken this even further. He's appointed recently several new special advisors. They will be focusing either entirely or in part on sexual and gender-based crimes. This includes not only an advisor on sexual violence and conflict, but also a specific advisor focusing on gender-based persecution and advisors focusing on slavery crimes and crimes against children, which often have gender dimensions. He has also indicated that he will be creating, and he's also already embarked upon this process, a new policy on the prosecution of gender-based persecution. And so I think it's safe to say that we can expect Prosecutor Khan will continue Prosecutor Bensouda's legacy and build upon it, giving sexual and gender-based crimes the priority consideration that they deserve.
Thanks. I would like to give the opportunity to Mr. Deputy Prosecutor to add a response if you wish to that, but also there is a question on the chat that I think it would be great to address, which is the lack of budgetary funds. As we know, the budget has always been an issue at the ICC. This year, Prosecutor Khan asked for an increase on 8.5%. So it would be great, Mr. Deputy Prosecutor, if you wish to comment on anything of what Diane has just mentioned or the other speakers, but also if you would like to offer any thoughts on the budget and how it's hindering the activities of the Office of the Prosecutor.
Well, thank you. First of all, I think I can say very briefly in relation to what Diane has said, I agree. I think she's got it right in terms of the interpretation of the Rome Statute and the approach that we take to it, and the continuation, if you will, of Fatou's legacy with respect to the focus upon that particular aspect of violence that Karim Khan is picking up and will carry forward. So I think that's a very positive indication of the continuing legacy that Fatou has left. She really did make a very strong mark in that area, and it's really stamped, if you will, the outlook of the OTP, the understanding of the OTP of how important this aspect of victimization is, and so you see that being carried forward in what Karima is doing in a very progressive way. So I think you're absolutely right, Diane. I think we can look forward to interesting things. It's too bad in a sense that we have to, but that's the world we live in. And if we can continue to deal with that aspect of victimization and crime, then I think this is a good thing. Let me come and try and demonstrate that my passive understanding of Spanish is pretty decent. Because I listened to you, Raquel, and also Calixto. I know I've heard this before, the disappointment of civil society, particularly in the lack of a preliminary examination activities report this year. I remember during Fatou's time, it was standing room only before COVID-19 when we had the side events on that activity report, on the launch of the report. It was a moment when everybody got together, and I mean, the tension in the room, the excitement in the room was palpable. I can't say I always really enjoyed it, to be honest with you, but it was a very good moment, I thought, in the life of the office, and it was part of our effort to be transparent. And I don't think you really, I think what I'm going to say is, give Karim a chance, give him a little space and a little time, because he's just come into office. There's so much that's going on. I think he just needed to sort of take stock of things, how he wants to report, how he wants to communicate with the outside world. He's been pretty forthcoming in statements and trying to let people know what's going on. So I'm not sure, frankly, just what approach he's going to take. It may be that he wants to do some kind of reporting on OTP activities that's broader than simply preliminary examinations. I'm not sure. My mandate runs out in March, so I'm not going to commit the poor man to anything. But clearly, he will have a communication strategy, and he does believe in the importance of communication with civil society and, of course, with other stakeholders. With respect to Venezuela, I could just say very briefly that you're right. Fatou had taken the Venezuela preliminary examination to a point, and it had reached a point. There were some litigation issues that I'm probably not free to talk about at the moment. At least I don't remember whether they've become public or if I still have to be very careful about what I say. But certainly, part of what her thinking is we reached a certain point, and it really was up to the new prosecutor to take the decision on opening the investigation. I think that's clearly what the direction was that she was in, but I think she felt that it really, given where we'd reached in the process, it was really up to Karim to take that final decision, which he did. I think in quite a remarkable way, when you think that, we'll see how it works, the engagement that he's trying to develop with Venezuelan authorities, but I'm sure with Venezuelan and civil society as well. We'll see how that works. But, it may be significant that Venezuela has not done, what the Philippines did or what Burundi did. They haven't sort of, picked up their marbles and said they're not going to play anymore and walked away. They're still engaged with the ICC. So this is a very interesting time, a very dynamic time, and we'll have to watch, and we'll need your support, I think, in that regard. Calixto, you made some other comments, and I agree with you that the framework policy paper as a framework was really a way of communicating to the outside world how we were progressing, how we were thinking. And the introduction in the report of what you called phase one, which we call phase one, was really an effort to show that there's a lot of work that people are sometimes not aware of that we do, and it's done confidentially because of our obligation of confidentiality. If people who submit communications to us speak about them publicly, then of course we can say something, but if they don't, we have to be very respectful of that notion of confidentiality. We've always found that tension between the wish to be transparent and to keep people informed, but at the same time respecting their confidentiality, but also the confidentiality of the work that we do. The only comment I'm going to make about Colombia is this, and I was involved, as you probably know, in several of the missions to Colombia, and took a very personal interest in that particular situation. And you can see that in a sense, we were trying to gauge what was the best way in which to be able to close the preliminary examination that had lasted for so many years, and yet be sure that things were on the right track, that we were doing our job, and that our responsibilities were being properly discharged under the statutes, responsibilities that Colombia, along with other states parties, had given us. And I think it's very interesting that Karim has done what he's done. He brought on side, crucially, the special jurisdiction for peace. And I think that maybe there are elements of civil society that are still hurting a little bit and maybe not quite with him yet, but let's see what happens. The preliminary examination has closed, but the engagement has not. He is still, the OTP is still involved with Colombia, in some ways in a more dynamic way than in the past. And we'll just have to see how that works. But I guess the way I look at it is, does it matter being a part of the ICC family? For Colombia, it really has mattered. And is it going to continue to matter? We hope so. So again, we're going to need civil society support in this regard. I listened to what was said about Georgia and outreach. And of course, in a sense, Georgia was the first investigation outside of an environment that we'd become very familiar with. And I think the points that are made are perfectly valid ones. I think we had a pretty good understanding of the context in Georgia by the time we opened the investigation, but one of the things that we found was that the Georgians themselves, and I mean the authorities, but also I think civil society, had to get used to us. They just weren't used to dealing with us, even though they were part of the ICC family. And this isn't uncommon. We find it in many different situations where we're going in new. Sudan, Bangladesh, all of these situations, some hostile, some friendly, people are getting used to us. And I think we had to find our way in Georgia, but I think the notion of a very carefully planned out outreach strategy is a good one. I mean, it's true to say that outreach is primarily the responsibility of the registry, but we have to have our own ways of communicating what we're doing as prosecutors. And at the same time as we have to protect the confidentiality of our operations and investigations, just to protect the safety of people. And especially in a situation like Georgia, you have some very interested parties. I don't think you misunderstand me, Mariam. Very interested parties wanting to know what we're doing. And so we had to take extraordinary steps to protect communications, to protect our ability to gather information without exposing people to undue risk. But I mean, I think you're sort of caught. I mean, the more people understand about why we're there and what we're doing, I suppose the easier it is for us to make inroads and to make contact with people. But we do have to be careful, and it's trying to find that balance, which is difficult. I think you'll see coming up a real effort to develop communication strategies and outreach. It's part of the IER report. So we have the support, if you will, of that to try and develop these strategies, but also I think it's very much within the vision of Karim. Now, I thank Enid for her question on the budget. Thank you very much, Enid. I know you have our interests at heart. I suppose I've got to say we've survived the latest budget round. We had originally, it's true, asked for 8% increase in the OTP, and we were a bit less, I think, than some of the other organs. Initially, we thought we were going to get 5.4. That's what the chair of CBF reported to the Hague Working Group. And then we discovered to our horror that we're getting 4.7% increase. Karim was not happy. He's been very public about it. But in the end, that's what's come through for us. The court itself has suffered some reduction in what it was seeking. And frankly, what we are doing now in it is looking at what this means for us in terms of our resources, of our ability to hire staff and to maintain staff, and all of the rest of it. This is the process we go through at the end of each year, beginning of the coming year, every time, and then we start into a new budget round. It's constant. I think if I was to sum it up in a sentence, in the end, we need resources. We need the financial resources. It's unfortunately just the lifeblood of any organization. And if we don't have them, it does constrain our ability to do things. You can have all of the objectives, all of the ends that you desire to accomplish in the world, but if you can't connect those ends, those objectives to the means you have available, you're going to fail. And this is something that Karim is certainly very aware of, that we were aware of for the 9 years of Fatou's term in office. And for me personally, it's been the most anguishing aspect of the work. All the things that we could be doing if we just had a little bit more to do it with. But I think we just, continue to fight the good fight, try and get the best results we can, demonstrate true fiscal responsibility. And my hope is that states parties that fund us will see that we're worth the investment. So I hope that responds to the questions and comments. I hope I've not missed anybody's comments. Thanks, Raquel.
Thank you. That was very thorough. And I think you have addressed pretty much all the points that were raised over the past hour. We still have 15 minutes left, and I would like to bring back Mariam, because I think on precisely what you were just mentioning, Mr. Deputy Prosecutor, on how the lack of resources affects activities. Something that came up during the consultations that we held over the summer with over 70 organizations was the need for more outreach. And generally the prosecutor, as the prosecutor's office, as you said, there is a part of that falls on the registry, but also it's a matter of resources why the prosecutor's office cannot do more outreach. So I would like to hear Mariam's opinion on how important do you think is for the Office of the Prosecutor to engage with communities from early stages, including the preliminary examination phase?
Thank you. I would add to whatever I said that for us, and Georgia is very distinct with its culture and history. So especially victims are very vulnerable in the region. So this is very specific group. So really OTP should gather and secure potential evidence, including witness testimonials during the preliminary examination. I think this was an error because it was not done during the early stage, eventually affecting the whole investigation. And especially this applies to situation countries where the period lasts for several years. And we know that since the crimes were committed and opening of the investigation, it lasted almost 8 years. And during this time, evidence got lost, the memories of victims got faded. So this evidence had to be saved. This didn't happen in Georgia. And by the time opening of the investigation, many victims and witnesses already have passed away. So therefore, I think a lot depends on outreach. And also, a Georgian case has to be viewed not only as a challenge, but as an opportunity in order just to learn from the mistakes and change approach in the future, especially for countries outside Africa.
Thanks, Mariam. That was quite insightful and really something that in more general terms, a sentiment I think was shared among many other situation countries at the ICC. I would like to bring back Calixto. Hola, Calixto. Me gustaría darte la oportunidad de dar un rebate a cualquiera de los comentarios que hayas escuchado del resto de los panelistas. Y si quieres dar algún remarque final antes de que empecemos ya terminar el evento.
Muchas gracias, Raquel. No, yo quiero hacer alusión a una pregunta que hay en el chat sobre cómo incorporar la visión del tercer mundo al sistema legal de la Corte Penal Internacional y otras instancias jurisdiccionales internacionales. Yo creo que el camino más adecuado es utilizar las instancias internacionales. Y no solamente la Corte Penal Internacional, sino el sistema de Naciones Unidas, que tiene una importancia capital en la construcción también de doctrina internacional en materia de derechos humanos y también de responsabilidad internacional y de rendición de cuentas. También los sistemas regionales. Nosotros en América Latina tenemos uno de los mejores sistemas, que es el sistema interamericano, en donde se ha producido muchísima doctrina y muchísima jurisprudencia sobre establecimiento de responsabilidades internacionales. Entonces, yo creo que la respuesta a esa pregunta es que las organizaciones de la sociedad civil en los países en donde se cometen crímenes de competencia de la Corte Penal Internacional deben estar dispuestas y calificadas también y formarse para poder utilizar los mecanismos internacionales de manera adecuada. Yo creo que es un camino que requiere formación, requiere muchas veces paciencia, porque una de las grandes dificultades para el litigio, tanto en la Corte Penal Internacional como en las instituciones internacionales de derechos humanos, es tener la capacidad de resistir una carrera que no es una carrera de 100 metros, sino es un maratón. Y para resistir un maratón se requieren grandes esfuerzos de conocimiento, de utilización y de persistencia. Yo quiero agradecer las diferentes opiniones de mis colegas, quiero agradecer también las respuestas del señor Stewart. a todos los planteamientos que hemos hecho. Yo creo que es importante, son importantes estos espacios de discusión y de construcción y de reflexión para un conocimiento colectivo y para una mejor utilización de la Corte Penal Internacional, que es una corte joven, y yo creo que el aporte importante de la oficina del fiscal es que ha evolucionado en términos de pasar de una situación basada más en la empiria, en el trabajo empírico, a sistematizar y a dar un marco consolidado que puede ser mejorado, pero que ha sido sustancialmente mejorado bajo la administración de la fiscal Fatou Bensouda. Muchas gracias.
Gracias, Calixto, por esas observaciones finales y por responder la pregunta en el chat. We have another question in the chat that we are not going to have time to answer it, unfortunately, which is directed at the Mr. Deputy Prosecutor. So I want to start wrapping up and give the floor to Alison for some final remarks about the work we have done together for the stock-taking exercise, particularly on the area of outreach, which is something we worked together over this summer and held consultations, hearing those voices from civil society groups on the ground. So Alison, over to you to tell us a bit more about it and give us the final remarks.
Thank you very much, Raquel, and thank you very much to today's speakers, and particularly to FIDH and the Women's Initiatives for Gender Justice for co-hosting this event, and particularly for working together on the report, which has been a very interesting and useful exercise, I have to say, also for us. I did want to say that to our perspective, this report is really very important, not just as a means of assessing the legacy of Fatou Bensouda, and a strong and impressive legacy it is, but also in terms of the insights, the ideas, and the recommendations that have come from the people most affected by the work of the OTP and our partners in civil society in countries where the court is doing its work. And for us, the consultations and the process of putting the report together really demonstrated how interconnected everything is, particularly in terms of outreach, really underpinning how the office is viewed publicly and underpinning how people can actually know and understand the OTP and its challenges and successes. I had some thoughts to share on outreach. I think the Deputy Prosecutor maybe stole my thunder a bit and said all of them. Except I did just want to highlight that one main lesson and message that we heard from the consultations conducted over the summer was the critical importance of building on the work that has been done throughout the tenure of Prosecutor Bensouda to develop not just OTP strategies on outreach, but an integrated strategy for the court as a whole. So cooperation, coordination, clear messaging, everybody on the same page. That was a really important point that came out during the consultations. And so it is good that it's in the independent expert review report, as the Deputy Prosecutor mentioned, and we will be looking forward to that as sort of the next step for outreach at the OTP and the court. So I would conclude just by saying a big thank you to the No Peace Without Justice team, Marcela Del Portillo and Matteo Tonella, who have subsequently moved on to other roles, but were absolutely fantastic throughout this process. A major thanks to FIDH for bringing us on board and for this great experience and the really great reports. And most of all, I would like to say thank you to colleagues who participated in the consultations over the summer that have been mentioned. Your insights were invaluable, and we absolutely 100% appreciate your time, your dedication, and your commitment. So thank you very much.
Thanks, Alison. I really want to add to the thank yous as well, because I see many people here today who were part of the consultations, and they did put a lot of time on it and gave us very valuable insights, and Mariam and Calixto were part of them. So to wrap it up, to leave it here, I want to thanks all the speakers that we had today. You've been great. Thank you for sharing the knowledge with us. Thank you also to the audience for the questions, for being present, to almost 50 of you who have been here with us today in a very busy December. And the information to where to find the report is just been put on the chat, so you can find there the whole report on sexual and gender-based crimes, preliminary examinations, and outreach to affected communities and civil society. We do have another ASP side event tomorrow, organized by FIDH. The information will be also put on the chat shortly, and you can get the details there to register. It will be on complementarity tomorrow. We can leave it here for this session. Thank you very much for joining us, and I hope you enjoy it. The recording will be made available in a few days' time. Thank you.
Thank you. Merci, gracias.
Gracias a todos.
Merci.
Thank you.
Thank you.